What's the biggest lie taught in history? Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-un's grandfather, was most likely an imposter. The original Kim Il-sung was a general in many Korean militia groups and a key player of several liberation movements that supported the independence of Korea from Japan. And, allegedly, an officer in the Soviet military during World War II. Records of any influential member of Korea's movements were spotty back then. But the consensus was that he was an older person. The Kim Il-sung that the Soviets trotted out and installed as the leader of North Korea was advertised as the same person, but was barely 30 years old. Biggest? No. But the one that nags me the most is the myth of Poland being so primitive and backwards that they tried to fight German tanks with riders on horseback. How it actually happened. Poland did have cavalry units, as did most armies. At a place called Krojanty, Poland did deploy their cavalry against German troops. They sent their cavalry against an infantry and won that battle. What followed was Germany came in with tanks and artillery and forced a Polish retreat, although it nonetheless stopped Germany from advancing. Then after, the Nazis began circulating a rumor that they'd had a sweeping victory when Poland charged their sophisticated tanks with horses. Because it makes your war effort look good if you portray your enemies as a bunch of idiots. After the war ended, historians had a tendency to forget that the German Department of Propaganda might not be the most accurate source of information. You'll learn this next year, followed up by you should have learned this last year. I'm not sure it's a lie taught in school, but it's a huge misconception that nobody corrects until college. Our founding fathers absolutely hated each other. I'm talking about I will try to punch you in the face when I see you. Hate. Our country was astoundingly founded on the backs of people arguing on a daily basis. Especially Jefferson. A lot of people hated him. Adams. Hamilton. Even Washington had beef with him. It's astonishing our country was established the way it was. When you think about it. That people thought the world was flat before Columbus. It's taught that Columbus was super smart because he thought the world was round. Educated people knew the world was round. Columbus was actually super dumb because he insisted the world was much smaller than it was mathematically shown to be. Which is why his journey west took so much longer than he thought it would. Schools often spend a lot of time on the Holocaust but neglect other genocides in the 20th century, such as the Armenian genocide, Pol Pot killing about a quarter of the Cambodian population, or the North American genocide of the 80s where the Guatemalan army wiped out indigenous villages killing about 200,000 people. Edit. That half of the Irish population died because of a potato famine. While we did suffer from the blight, the fallen population was helped by Britain, preventing food from being imported and controlling the food that remained in the country. We're still being taught that it was the potato blight that destroyed the country. I'm going to bring up the lie of omission like other did. The Yapei of Nanking and the brutality of the Japanese during World War II. This was not covered in any of my history classes and I just learned about it at the age of 28. Nero played the fiddle while Rome burned. First off, the fiddle didn't even exist back then, and secondly, when Nero heard of the fire he actually raced to the city to direct efforts to save it and provide aid to the citizens. I was always taught that this is a metaphoric statement, more to encapsulate Nero's rule than be about the specific burning incident. Not so much a lie as more of an omission due to the many dark parts of US history that never get heard from again. I learned about these after I was done in school. From everyone. We're the righteous good guys, and when we kill people it's only to help them and protect the innocent. Anyone who opposes us is an evil bad guy who hates, insert thing here. Every armed group of crazies in the world tells that one to themselves about their own history, while they go around killing and kidnapping anyone who resists their good guyness. It's not necessarily part of typical school curriculum, but the huge misconception that the Romans and Greeks were gay. They didn't view sexuality in terms of gay versus straight. This is contemporary thought being forced upon social mores of the past. In the ancient world, Sexuality was defined as passive versus active partners. Or in other words, the penetrated versus the penetrator respectively. For lack of a better term, the latter was seen as more virtuous than the former. So a man could penetrate another man and it was seen as better than being penetrated. And the penetrator wasn't regarded any differently. Obviously, women would be at a disadvantage in such a social system. But they didn't have as many rights as men anyway. This is also why the Vestal Virgins were held in such high regard. Because, despite being women, they were, ideally, never penetrated. Essentially giving them a virtuous status as that of a man. The Boston Massacre. It wasn't really a massacre. As the story you get told in like 3rd grade says. Some British soldiers started killing people at random. But that is way off. A group of teens walk up to a British soldier and start tormenting him and laughing at him. Eventually a crowd forms. And they start throwing rocks, snowballs, etc. at the soldier. Nearby officer calls over some other soldiers and rushes to his aid. Nobody knows who opened fire. But it was more or less a small battle. And less of a massacre. As only 5 people actually died. Napoleon was short. He was an average height for his time. That the French surrender or don't win wars. French surrender in World War II is easily mocked despite the fact that the Germans' rapid advance gave the Allies very little time to react. 20 years before this, France stood blooded but resolved in the First World War. 75% of the Western Front was held by the French, and battles like Verdun show how determined they are in fighting. The list is almost endless with wars France fought. Many alone and against great odds. The Napoleonic Wars is one of the best examples of France's ability to fight the rest of Europe and succeed for over 15 years. Despite British propaganda, France was able to knock Britain back over the Channel. Defeat the huge coalition army of Austria and Russia. Beat Prussia and 5 European coalitions. Half understanding of France during the Second World War seems to have blinded people to one of the longest and most successful military nations. That we are the good guys. With few exceptions, we, whichever country or community is, consider ourselves the good guys. Funny example. In Niagara, USA, the redcoats are the bad guys. Cross a bridge and the redcoats are the good guys. That Native Americans were peaceful before the white Europeans showed up. In fact, many tribes did not get along with each other. That only blacks were enslaved and only whites did the enslaving. Kinda off topic but kinda relevant. BTW college level. The other day I heard a classmate say, wait, America will be part of the bad guys and WWII? In reference to Trump and the Russians. I told him war doesn't have good and bad guys. There are winners and losers. Winners are always right and losers are always wrong. War does not determine who is right, only who is left. Thanks for that one, Wordsworth. This is more like what they taught in school, but that America was the saving grace of World War II. I know the argument you're going to make. That the Soviets were the true muscle behind the Allies. And that's true. But without the help from the American Lend-Lease program, as well as American industry being unmolested by bombers, they, and the British, would have been in a much tighter spot. Santa? Like what? Are you trying to say Santa's not real or something? I think the whole vaccines give your kids autism has to be towards the top. 15 years of gullible parents were like progress. Probably that the colonization of the United States was a peaceful and kind-hearted process. There was actually a lot of genocide. At no point was I ever taught in school that colonization was peaceful or kind-hearted. I think that's changing though. We certainly learned about the Trail of Tears and various massacres when I took US history. Gettysburg is not the northernmost battle in the Civil War. It was the Battle of Scroot Farms. Schools love to neglect to mention that President Woodrow Wilson was a KKK member. Got any proof? I think this is false. Anything regarding inventions. people in power, and Native Americans. Jews were the only ones who were persecuted and died in the Holocaust. I'm a Jew, and I know this to be untrue. I think it is well known that homosexuals, Roma and others were. People constantly say, Luke, I'm your father, when it's actually no. I can't pick one. But 1. The Crusades were aggression of Catholic European barbarians on peaceful Muslims. 2. Middle Ages were far more primitive compared to ancient times. It depends who we exactly compare to whom. Medieval Europe were far more civilized than it's taught. I can throw as well Germans invented concentration camps, British did. Polish death camps, in fact, German death camps on Polish soil, and much more. I've learned one certain thing from the history so far. It's never ever simple and one-sided, as it's believed. The myth that the Catholic Church opposed science during the Middle Ages. I would assume that it depends on where you live. In the U.S., I never had the religion problem. No part of the Bible or other religious text was taught to me as historical fact, and I went to a Catholic school before I went to JR. Hi. I'd say that one of the biggest lies I encountered were lies of omission. How did Hitler come to power? How did he get as far as he did? What were the major issues leading to the U.S. Civil War? Other than slavery. Lots and lots of those kinds of things that are just left out because it's not very popular to speak about Hitler or the Confederate U.S. in any kind of favorable light, but it's ridiculous to not try to learn and understand how and where they went wrong. It's quite sad, Imo. Hitler came to power because he brainwashed people. That certainly stands as one of the most insidious myths of history. Hitler's beneficiaries, plunder, racial war, and the Nazi welfare state is one of my top recommends for history books. History is just a set of lies everyone's kind of agreed on. Not the biggest lie. But here in the US we often teach that slavery in the colonies was mostly a United States thing. The whole of the Americas engaged in slavery. And conditions on a sugarcane plantation in South America were often significantly worse than they were here. We were one of the last ones to abolish it. And it even picked up here in the later years before the Civil War. But people are shocked when I tell them. Up to the early 1800s, the US accounted for only a small chunk of the total slave trade. How Hitler was the evil mass murderer of the world. Mao and Stalin killed so many more people. When was the last time you heard someone compared to Mao? And let me just stop you from stepping on your own dick when it comes to who was killed and why. I think part of it is the systematic, targeted, and scientific nature of the Holocaust that differentiates it. Mao and Stalin killed a lot of people through famine, revolution, work camps, etc. Hitler attempted to systematically eliminate an ethnicity in a factory-like way. Both are obviously horrible though. IDK if it's a lie technically. But the idea that Jesus Christ was poor. He could read at a very young age. He wasn't from the lineage of priests. I'm guessing a very low percentage of the population was literate in those days. And most likely it wasn't the poor folks. After 3 days they found him in the temple courts, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. Everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished. Luke 2:46-48. This is the only part in the Bible that touches upon Jesus' childhood with regard to his knowledge. There's no mention of him reading at all. Jesus Christ's wealth level in the Bible was established by the offering his parents gave around the time of his birth. Birds instead of a larger lamb. I think it was a lamb. They could only afford the poor people offering. I don't know much else. Not really a lie. But I learned in college that Benjamin Franklin would have been considered pretty progressive. Since he lived by the scientific method. He conducted his own experiments on whether or not an African American was truly inferior to the white man. Obviously. He found that we were equals and he released his slaves due to his findings. I learned this in a class on the history of technology and it was more of a fun fact than a topic that was discussed. So I apologize for a lack of reference. Money doesn't make you happy. Well, yay. But I'm sure you're pretty happy when money pays your bills, buys you a car, buys you food that you like, and allows you to survive rather than having to hunt and farm your whole life. That Jesus was white. Like, come on, Mother Earth. Edit. Please stop sending me PMs about where Jesus is actually from. I already know. I don't know that people are taught that. I think it's just our conceptualization of him. Like, in paintings and whatnot. But I get your point. The United States was founded on Christianity. That good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. The donation of Constantine. It's a forged document that says that Constantine willingly gave his entire empire to the Catholic Church in Rome. Centralization of the Roman Church basically comes from one big lie. And people kept using this false document every once in a while. Edit. Misread the question. I'm keeping it anyway. It was probably taught as a truth way back in the days though. Columbus discovered America. Except he kinda did as far as Europe was concerned. Yes. While before. The Vikings did. But that wasn't well known to Europe at the time of Columbus. And if we're talking even before that, the natives discovered it first when they crossed over from Russia to Alaska on the Beringa about 25,000 years ago. For all intents and purposes, Columbus did discover America when we're referring to most of Europe's knowledge of it.